Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling completely drained without even knowing why? No shouting, no obvious insult, just a lingering weight that settles in your chest. It happens at dinner tables, in group chats, in late-night texts that start off innocent, but somehow end with you questioning your worth. Sometimes chaos doesn't come crashing in like a storm. It seeps in quietly, through repeated interactions that chip away at your clarity, through relationships that look fine on the surface, but leave you lying awake at night, replaying things that shouldn't matter, but somehow do. And the strange part is you begin to think it's normal, that maybe you're just too sensitive, that maybe this is just how life feels as an adult, tired, tense, emotionally tangled. But let me offer a different lens. What if the problem isn't what's happening around you, but what you're unconsciously tuned into? Because here's something both Stoic philosophy and modern neuroscience agree on. The energy you live in is the energy you attract. It's not magic. It's not woo-woo. It's biology. When your nervous system is constantly dysregulated, tense, hypervigilant, overwhelmed, it sends signals that others can feel. Not through words, through presence, your tone, your posture, even your silence. And the people who thrive on dysfunction, they're incredibly good at picking up those signals. But here's the good news. Once you start changing your inner frequency, the world shifts how it treats you. Not because they suddenly respect your boundaries, but because you no longer give off the energy that invites their chaos. This transformation doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't need you to announce a boundary or block anyone on social media. It begins in the quiet, in how you breathe, in what you tolerate, in the moments where you used to over-explain and now you just pause. I remember a time when I felt like I was constantly in rescue mode, always trying to fix, to help, to make everyone feel better, even when I was falling apart inside. And the more I did that, the more chaotic people seemed to show up. It felt like I had a sign on my forehead that said, "Dump your emotions here." But I wasn't a victim. I was simply vibrating at a frequency that matched the very chaos I claimed to want to avoid. What changed? It wasn't some big dramatic decision. It was subtle. I stopped answering messages immediately. I stopped justifying my silence. I stopped offering explanations to people who didn't really care about the answer. And slowly, something shifted. The people who thrived on emotional reaction started disappearing. The situations that used to bait me didn't land the same way. Not because the world got quieter, but because I did. This video is about that shift. It's not just cut off toxic people advice. It's deeper than that. It's about becoming someone who no longer entertains dysfunction. Not because you're cold, but because you're finally aligned. We're going to explore 10 inner transformations, each one drawn from ancient Stoic wisdom and modern neuroscience, that help you stop feeding what drains you and start becoming a person that chaos can no longer recognize. If you've ever felt stuck in repeating patterns, if you've ever wondered why the same kind of people keep showing up in your life, and if you're ready to change, not just what's happening around you, but how you respond to it, then keep watching, because this isn't just about peace. It's about power, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to yell or fight or prove anything, the kind that simply radiates and lets everything that doesn't match it fall away. Part 1. Silence is the strongest boundary you have. There's a moment, quiet, often overlooked, when you choose not to respond, not because you're afraid, not because you don't have the words, but because you've finally realized it's not worth it. That moment is a boundary, and it's far more powerful than any argument you could ever win. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. In a world that equates volume with strength, choosing not to speak can look like surrender. But those who've truly healed, those who've outgrown the need to defend every detail of their identity, they know better. Let me tell you a story. A client of mine, Brian, works in marketing. There's a woman on his team, Melissa, who's made it her habit to throw passive-aggressive jabs in meetings. Brian's great at selling the dream, she once smirked, but someone's got to do the real work too. Now, the old version of Brian would have taken that bait. He would have fired back with stats, performance charts, maybe even sarcasm of his own. But this time, he just smiled. He let the silence stretch, then went right back to outlining the campaign plan. Calm, clear, undisturbed. After the meeting, she looked rattled. Not because he won, but because she didn't get the reaction she expected. And when people lose access to your reactivity, they start losing power over your peace. You see, most conflict isn't about the words, it's about control. When someone pushes your buttons, what they're really doing is trying to hijack your attention, your time, your emotional presence. But here's the thing, you get to decide what's worthy of your energy. And not everything deserves a response. Stoic philosophers understood this long before modern psychology confirmed it. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by things themselves, but by the view we take of them. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that dignity is not about what we say, but what we refuse to become. In today's terms, that means you don't have to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to defend your values to people who only show up to question them. You don't have to attend every emotional battle you're invited to. Silence is not retreat, it's command. Because what happens in that pause, when you don't take the bait, is something deeper than just self-control. It's nervous system regulation. It's emotional mastery. It's your body telling your brain, I am safe even when provoked. I don't need to perform. I don't need to convince. I don't need to bleed energy to be valid. Think about how often we react, not because the situation calls for it, but because our ego feels threatened. A raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, a subtle dig, and suddenly we're 12 years old again, trying to prove we're smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough. But when you've done the inner work, when you've sat with your triggers, held space for your discomfort, and chosen a peace over performance, you become harder to provoke, not colder, not distant, just anchored. You become someone who pauses instead of panics, who listens more than defends, who sees through the provocation and simply chooses not to engage. And here's the part people don't tell you. That kind of silence speaks louder than any speech. It says, I see what you're doing, I just don't operate at that level anymore. So the next time someone throws shade, tries to embarrass you in a group setting, or drops a loaded comment meant to spark a reaction, try this. Say nothing, breathe. Let your body stay still. Let your eyes soften and simply move forward. They'll notice, but more importantly, you'll notice that you didn't betray yourself just to be heard, that you didn't abandon your peace just to win a point, that you didn't enter a war that was never yours to begin with. That's not silence out of fear. That's silence rooted in power. And the more you practice it, the more untouchable you become. Part 2, when you stop resonating with chaos, it retreats. There's a strange thing that happens when you become truly grounded inside. The chaos around you starts to lose interest. Not because it's gone, not because the world suddenly becomes peaceful, but because you no longer respond the way you used to. Chaos feeds on reaction. It thrives on emotional availability, the kind where you rush in to fix, to explain, to prove your value by solving someone else's storm. But when that part of you grows quiet, when you no longer offer your nervous system on a silver platter, the chaos begins to move on. It looks for another host, another place to plug into, because it can no longer find home inside you. I want to share something that happened to my friend Elise. For years, she was the rescuer in her friend group. Whenever someone's relationship fell apart, she was there. Middle of the night phone calls, long texts, emergency coffee meetups. And it wasn't just one friend, it was a rotating cast of chaos. Elise wore her loyalty like a badge of honor. She thought being there all the time for everyone made her a good person. But over time, she started to notice something. The patterns didn't change. The same friend who cried over her breakup 3 months ago was back in the same situation, with the same guy, and the same tears. And Elise realized she wasn't helping. She was enabling. She wasn't offering support. She was offering her peace as a sacrifice. So one day she did something different. When her friend called mid-drama, Elise still picked up, but instead of diving in to solve, she just said, "I trust you'll figure this out. You're stronger than you think." No rescue, no overextending, just presence. And you know what happened? The friend stopped calling, not out of anger, not out of betrayal, just energy mismatch. The chaos needed emotional fuel. Elise stopped providing it. This is what happens when you change your frequency. It's not about becoming cold or unkind. It's about no longer entertaining what keeps you small. The people who are drawn to your old patterns will often drift when those patterns disappear. That's not abandonment. That's energetic realignment. It's like what Marcus Aurelius wrote. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are constantly wrapped around saving others, fixing their messes, decoding their moods, you're training your mind to live in instability. But if your thoughts begin to return to calm, to clarity, to discernment, your world begins to mirror that too. And this shift isn't just philosophical, it's physiological. When your nervous system is regulated, when you're no longer in a state of constant alarm, your body stops broadcasting distress signals. You stop leaking energy. You stop inviting entanglement. The people who rely on triggering others for connection, they feel that shift, and they usually move on. But this isn't always easy, especially if you've been the dependable one, the helper, the peacekeeper. It can feel unnatural, even cruel, to stop absorbing someone else's crisis. But here's the truth. Carrying what isn't yours doesn't make you noble. It makes you exhausted. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let people stand on their own, to hold space without taking over, to trust that others are capable of navigating their storms without you losing yourself in the process. And when you do that, when you finally stop resonating with chaos, it doesn't know what to do with you. It starts to retreat because it no longer has a foothold, no doorway in, no button to press. And in that space, something remarkable happens. You reclaim your energy, your clarity, your presence. You realize you don't have to shrink, chase, or absorb anything to be valuable. You just have to be aligned, still, whole. And when you live from that place, when your inner peace becomes stronger than the pull of someone else's storm, the chaos doesn't fight you anymore. It forgets your name. Part 3, you don't need to cut people off, just stop feeding them your energy. There's a common belief that in order to protect your peace, you have to make dramatic exits, block people, burn bridges, announce your boundaries like declarations of war. But the truth is, you don't always need to cut people off. You just need to stop feeding them your energy. Because most toxic dynamics aren't sustained by direct conflict. They're kept alive by your reaction, your attention, your willingness to explain, to justify, to manage someone else's discomfort. Let me share a story about a man named Greg. He's in his late 50s, runs a small carpentry business, and is the kind of person people naturally lean on. But there was this one person, an old friend named Anthony, who had a habit of reaching out only when things were falling apart. Job troubles, relationship drama, overdue bills. Every conversation ended with the same thing. Greg, you think you could spot me a little something? Just until next week. And Greg, being generous and loyal, said yes every time. Not because he enjoyed being used, but because he hated the feeling of guilt that came with saying no. It wasn't about the money, it was the emotional weight. Until one day, Greg changed one small thing. He didn't block Anthony, he didn't confront him, he simply stopped responding immediately. No explanations, no apologies. Just space. The next time Anthony reached out, Greg let the message sit unread. The time after that, same thing. And you know what happened? Anthony stopped asking. Not because Greg laid down the law, but because the loop was broken. The emotional reward was gone. The attention, the validation, the instant access to Greg's time and generosity, it simply wasn't available anymore. This is what most people don't understand. Energy is a currency, and when you stop spending it on relationships that only withdraw and never deposit, something powerful happens. The people who depended on your reaction to stay connected begin to drift, and they don't always go quietly. They might guilt trip you. You've changed. They might play the victim. I guess I don't matter to you anymore. They might even try to provoke a confrontation just to feel something from you. But if you stay grounded, if you resist the urge to explain yourself to people who never truly listened, you'll notice something incredible. They start to fade, because energy is what keeps dysfunction alive. When you withhold it, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, the dysfunction can't breathe. It starts gasping. Then it goes looking for a new host. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca once wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and often what we fear isn't the person's reaction. It's our own discomfort with not being liked, not being understood, not being seen as the nice one. But here's what I've learned. Peace isn't found in people-pleasing. It's found in restraint, in letting silence do the talking, in trusting that if someone only values you for your availability, not your humanity, they were never truly with you. You don't need to declare war on people who drain you. You just need to stop showing up in the same way. No angry texts, no final straw speeches, just a quiet shift in behavior. And that shift creates space. Space for clarity, for boundaries, for new kinds of connections that don't require you to overextend just to be accepted. So the next time you feel the pressure to keep someone in your life just because you've known them for years, ask yourself this: am I keeping this connection alive? Or am I just afraid of what will happen if I stop feeding it? Because when you stop handing over your time, your energy, your emotional oxygen, the people who depended on it will reveal who they truly were. And often you'll find they weren't nearly as permanent as you thought. Part 4. You become what you rehearse in your mind. Have you ever caught yourself replaying a moment in your head over and over again? Maybe it was a comment someone made years ago, something subtle, something offhand, like you're too sensitive, or you always overreact. It doesn't sound like much, but somehow it stuck. And without realizing it, you started living in reaction to that one sentence. You tried to be tougher. You stopped expressing when something hurt. You convinced yourself that showing emotion meant being weak. And somewhere along the way, you stopped trusting your own inner signals. You stopped being fully you. This is the quiet way self-doubt begins. Not in some dramatic, life-shattering event, but in small, repeated moments of mental rehearsal. Because what we think about, especially what we repeat, builds the blueprint of how we see ourselves, not just emotionally, but biologically. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity. Your brain forms new pathways based on what you focus on, which means every time you mentally revisit an insult, a failure, or a moment of shame, you reinforce that wiring. You strengthen the emotional connection to it. But here's the thing, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's happening now and what you're vividly remembering. So if you're reliving a wound from 5 years ago, your body thinks it's still happening. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your self-worth gets quieter. Let me share a story about Renee. She's a 42-year-old therapist who, ironically, struggled deeply with her own inner critic. Years ago, during a family gathering, her older brother laughed and said, "Renee always takes things too seriously. She's no fun at all." She laughed it off in the moment, but afterward it replayed in her mind like a broken record. Every time she felt the urge to speak up in a group, she'd hesitate. "Don't ruin the mood," her inner voice whispered. "Don't be too much." Over the years, that voice didn't fade. It got louder. Until one day during a session with her own mentor, she was asked a simple question. Whose voice are you listening to, and why are you still letting them write your story? That question broke something open. Because the truth is, most of us are walking around with voices in our heads that don't belong to us. Old teachers, family members, ex-partners, people who said something once, but we've been the ones repeating it ever since. So let me ask you, what are you rehearsing in your mind? What story are you telling yourself about who you are, what you're allowed to feel, and how much space you're allowed to take up? Because if you keep rehearsing pain, you'll start identifying with it. If you keep revisiting wounds, you'll start organizing your life around them. And if you let a single moment define you, you'll live in reaction to something that's no longer real. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes so powerful. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." He didn't say your circumstances, he said your thoughts, which means healing doesn't begin by rewriting the world. It begins by reclaiming the lens through which you see it and yourself. You can't always stop the past from knocking, but you can stop answering the door. Instead of revisiting what hurt you, start reinforcing what's possible for you. Instead of repeating, "I was too sensitive," ask, what if that sensitivity is actually my gift? Instead of trying to be harder, try being more whole. You become what you practice. So choose what you want to become and then practice that. Not once, but daily. Until the new story feels more true than the old wound. Because that's how real change begins. not with one loud declaration, but with quiet, repeated moments of truth. Part 5. Real change happens in silence. Real change doesn't make a scene. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't show up with a new wardrobe or a dramatic announcement on social media. In fact, the most powerful styles often look like empty, nothing at all, at least on the outside. But inside, everything is different. The way you think, the way you breathe, the way you respond when someone tries to press the same old buttons. You're no longer fighting to be understood. You're no longer rushing to prove that you've evolved, because something deeper has taken root. You've stopped performing and started becoming. I think of my friend Jamal. He's in his early 30s, used to be really vocal about leveling up, always posting motivational quotes, always talking about his plans, new goals, new routines, big shifts. And while none of it was fake, it was loud. It needed to be seen. Then, about a year ago, he went quiet. No more updates, no more declarations, just presence. And slowly people started to notice, not because he said anything, but because he was something different. The way he walked into a room, the way he listened instead of jumped in, the calm in his tone, the steadiness in his gaze, no noise, just grounded clarity. When someone asked him why he'd stopped sharing so much, he smiled and said, "I realized I needed to stop talking about my growth and give it room to actually happen." That hit me hard, because most of us, myself included, have gone through that stage where we want to be seen as changing. We want recognition. We want the people who hurt us to notice we're not the same. We want the world to know we're healing, we're growing, we're rising. But the truth is, real transformation is a private process. It's quiet because it's fragile. And when something is still taking shape, like a wound scabbing over or a seed rooting into soil, it doesn't need exposure, it needs protection. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius didn't shout about his self-mastery. He journaled in private, often reminding himself to return to reason, to integrity, to discipline. Seneca wrote in, "The first step toward improvement is to be aware of one's own faults." He didn't say, "Announce your progress." He said, "Observe yourself." And there's a reason why. When we speak too soon, we risk anchoring our identity to an idea, not a reality. We start performing change instead of living it. We seek applause instead of alignment. But when we stay silent, something sacred happens. Our nervous system finally has space to recalibrate. Our thoughts stop rushing to justify themselves, and we begin to move from reaction to intention. Think of it this way. You don't have to tell people that you've become more confident. It shows in your posture, your eye contact, your ability to say no without guilt. You don't have to declare that you've outgrown certain people. It shows in the way you no longer engage in the same drama. You don't have to say, "I'm done proving myself." It shows when you walk away without explaining. And that's the beauty of silent growth. It speaks through your presence, not your posts. So if you're in a season of change right now, and it feels invisible, trust it. You don't have to explain your evolution while it's still unfolding. You don't have to prove your progress to people who were never meant to understand it. You just have to keep becoming, quietly, consistently, steadily. Because when the new version of you is ready, it won't need an announcement. It will walk into every room, every conversation, every decision, and people will feel it. Not because you told them, but because your energy changed, and theirs no longer knows how to hold on to you. Part 6. Don't step into chaos that isn't yours. Not every fire needs your water. Not every storm needs your shelter. And not every moment of tension around you is yours to solve. But for many of us, it doesn't feel that way. We grow up believing that if someone around us is upset, it's our job to fix it, to smooth things over, to step in and make it okay, even if it costs us our own peace. But here's the truth: most people learn the hard way. When you constantly enter chaos that doesn't belong to you, you lose track of what does. Let me tell you about Rebecca. She's 49, a school administrator, mother of two, and often described as the glue that holds everyone together. At work, if a teacher was frustrated, Rebecca handled it. At home, if her sister called in tears, she dropped everything. If someone sent a passive-aggressive text in the family group chat, guess who responded with empathy and a voice of reason? Rebecca. But slowly she started noticing a pattern. The more she stepped in, the more people expected her to, and not just expected, demanded. It was as if her willingness to help had turned into permission to dump chaos at her feet. One evening, after a long, emotionally draining day, her brother called. Not to ask how she was, but to vent, loudly again. And for the first time, Rebecca didn't rush to soothe. She took a breath and said, "Hey, I care about you, but I'm not in a space to take this on right now. Let's talk tomorrow." There was silence, then a bit of confusion. But something remarkable happened. She didn't fall apart, and neither did he. Because when you stop carrying what isn't yours, the world doesn't collapse. It simply adjusts. You see, so much of our exhaustion doesn't come from what we're doing. It comes from what we're absorbing, the moods we take on, the problems we over-identify with, the emotional debris we collect, just because we're too used to saying, "Sure, I'll handle it." But Stoic wisdom teaches us a different way. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us and some things are not." And peace begins when we learn the difference. You are not responsible for someone else's emotional regulation. You are not the translator for every miscommunication. You are not the therapist for every angry friend, the sponge for every complaint, or the fixer of every issue that wasn't yours to begin with. You are allowed to care without caring, to witness without intervening, to love someone deeply and still say, "This isn't mine." That's not cold, that's clarity. And in many ways, it's a kind of emotional maturity we aren't taught growing up. Especially if you were the peacemaker, the empath, the one who learned early that staying quiet, staying helpful, staying emotionally available was the safest path. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to be available for everything just because you used to be. You can grow out of old roles. You can rewrite the terms of your presence. So next time someone tries to pull you into their storm, pause. Ask yourself, is this truly mine to hold? Do I have the capacity right now to engage with this? Or am I stepping in because I feel guilty not doing so? Because guilt is not the same as responsibility. And overextension is not the same as love. The world needs your wisdom, your calm, your steady presence, but not at the cost of your nervous system, not at the cost of your identity. Protect your lane, guard your peace, and remember you are not here to solve every problem. You are here to be whole. Part 7, your nervous system needs a detox from toxic environments. Our nervous system is not designed to live in a battlefield, but for many of us, that's exactly what it's doing every single day. Not because we're in physical danger, but because our environment, the people we interact with, the rhythms we follow, the messages we wake up to, keep pulling our minds into a state of survival. And most of the time, we don't even notice it because we've normalized the noise. Let me give you a real example. A woman named Teresa, 38, reached out to me recently. She said, "Every morning I wake up feeling tense, and I don't know why." When we started unpacking her routine, something simple stood out. Before even brushing her teeth, she was opening her phone and reading message after message from a group chat she'd been in since college. The messages weren't overtly cruel, but they were full of passive aggression, subtle competition, people venting, complaining, gossiping, all before 8 a.m. And every morning, Teresa's body went into a mild fight or flight response. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't safe. The emotional tone was unpredictable. She was absorbing stress that wasn't hers. And without realizing it, her nervous system had been conditioned to expect conflict the moment she opened her eyes. She didn't need more resilience. She needed better boundaries with her environment. So what did she do? She left the group, quietly, no explanation, no drama, just space. And within 2 weeks, she told me something shifted. She woke up calmer. Her thoughts weren't racing. Her shoulders weren't tight before coffee. Sometimes peace doesn't come from adding things. It comes from subtracting what shouldn't be there in the first place. Because here's what most people forget. Your nervous system listens to what you allow. The people you surround yourself with, the spaces you inhabit, the conversations you keep entering, they're all shaping your biology. And when those inputs are chaotic, your body responds accordingly. It tightens, it guards, it braces. You don't need a traumatic event to live in survival mode. You just need a daily environment that never lets your guard down. This is why Stoic thinkers place such high value on stillness, simplicity, and intentional living. Marcus Aurelius journaled not about controlling others, but about creating internal order, despite the chaos outside. And today, neuroscience backs that up. The brain is plastic. It adapts to whatever it's exposed to most. So the question is, what is your brain being trained by? Are your mornings shaped by anxiety and urgency? Are your evenings filled with overstimulation and noise? Is your peace being eroded by environments that reward drama and demand reaction? If so, the solution isn't more discipline. It's detox. Start small. Mute the chat that drains you. Decline the invite you know will leave you exhausted. Take your phone out of your bedroom. Reclaim 5 minutes of silence in the morning before the world tells you who to be. These aren't luxuries. They're necessary acts of nervous system repair. Because healing doesn't always look like journaling or therapy or a wellness retreat. Sometimes healing looks like closing the door, unfollowing quietly, saying no without guilt, letting the people who live off chaos continue without your participation. And the beautiful part is this: once your system resets, once your mind and body remember what calm feels like, you'll begin to notice how unnatural the noise always was. You won't crave the drama anymore. You won't feel drawn to tension. You'll crave quiet, clarity, clean air, both emotionally and energetically. And that craving is a sign that you're no longer addicted to surviving. You're finally ready to live. Part 8, focusing on yourself is the wisest way to regain strength. Every time you worry about what someone else thinks of you, you quietly drain a little of your own power, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, silently. It happens when you're in the middle of something important. Maybe you're finally writing that proposal or taking a first step towards something new, and suddenly your phone lights up. A message, a jab, A comment from someone who used to know you or thinks they still do. Maybe it's criticism, maybe it's sarcasm, or maybe it's just a vague, emotionally charged sentence that throws you off for the rest of the day. Now you're not thinking about your project. You're rehearsing your defense. You're trying to figure out why they sent it, what they meant, what you should say back. And just like that, you've left yourself. You've exited your lane. You've handed over your energy to something you cannot control. I've been there, and I'll be honest. There was a time when I thought responding immediately made me strong. That by defending myself, I was proving my worth. But over time, I realized something painful but true. Trying to prove yourself to someone who has already decided not to see you clearly is the fastest way to burn out. That's when I started choosing differently. Now, when something disruptive comes in, whether it's an unfair comment, a passive-aggressive email, or a vague post meant to provoke, I do one thing first. I pause. I breathe. And I remind myself, this moment is asking for my attention. But is it worthy of my attention? Most of the time, it's not. Because here's the truth. The more you focus on what's outside of you, the less power you have over what's within. And your real strength, it lives in what you choose to build, not what you feel pressured to defend. Take Alex, a 45-year-old architect I met during a workshop. He was in the middle of a high-stakes design project, something that could change the direction of his entire career. Midway through, he got a message from his ex-business partner throwing shade about the way Alex had handled a past deal. The old version of Alex would have picked up the phone immediately, but this time he didn't. He turned his phone over, he got up, walked outside, took a breath of cold air, and then he went back to work. That message, he never replied, and it never came up again. Because some things don't deserve a response. Some things only exist to test your focus, and when you stop reacting to them, they disappear. The Stoics knew this well. Seneca said, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." If your mind is scattered, trying to manage everyone's opinion, control every narrative, respond to every jab, you lose the one thing that grounds you: presence. Focus isn't just about productivity. It's a form of protection, a shield against distraction, manipulation, and energy leaks. When you focus on yourself, you're not being selfish. You're being strategic. You're telling the world, I know where I'm going, and I refuse to be pulled into anything that doesn't align with that direction. So the next time you feel tempted to defend yourself, to blame, to justify, ask, is this helping me build the life I want? Or is this just feeding the noise? Because your time is limited, your energy is finite, and every time you choose to direct that energy inward, into your craft, your peace, your healing, you're not abandoning anyone. You're returning to yourself. And that is where your true power lives. Part 9, no one can take the peace you don't give away. Peace isn't something you find, it's something you build. Choice by choice, breath by breath, by deciding what no longer gets to live inside you. Most of us spend years chasing peace like it's a place we'll arrive at once we fix everything outside us. Once that person apologizes. Once that job stabilizes. Once that misunderstanding is finally cleared. But real peace doesn't depend on the world playing along. It depends on you no longer offering yourself up to everything that tries to steal your stillness. Let me tell you about Jonah. He's 57, a retired fire chief who's lived through some of the most intense moments life can throw at you. But you know what kept him up at night? Not fires, not trauma. It was a single family member who every holiday season brought up something from 15 years ago. An old argument, a mistake, something Jonah had already apologized for twice. It didn't matter how much time had passed. This relative would find a way to bring it back up, subtly at first, then more directly. You never really took responsibility, you know. And for years, Jonah would take the bait. He'd try to explain, clarify, say sorry again, hoping maybe this time it would be enough. But it never was, until last year when Jonah changed something. At the first sign of that familiar accusation, he simply said, "That chapter is closed for me. I'm choosing to live in the present now." No anger, no defense, just a quiet boundary. And then he changed the subject. That moment marked a shift, not just in the conversation, but in Jonah himself, because for the first time, he didn't offer his peace as a bargaining chip. He didn't hand over control of his emotional state. He kept it, guarded it, chose it. And that's the thing about peace. It can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. When someone triggers you and you lash out, that's not them stealing your calm. That's you handing it over. When someone disrespects you and you spiral into overthinking, that's not them removing your worth. That's you placing your attention where it doesn't belong. Stoic wisdom reminds us of this truth again and again. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He didn't say control others. He said control your mind, your focus, your response, your energy. And that means peace isn't passive. It's not silence because you're scared. It's silence because you're solid. It's looking someone in the eye and knowing you don't owe them your reaction just because they're demanding it. It's letting someone stay confused about you without needing to correct the narrative. It's knowing that your inner world is your responsibility and no one else gets access unless you open the door. But let's be honest, this is hard. Especially when the person pressing your buttons is someone you care about. Especially when the urge to defend yourself is tied to old wounds. That's why peace isn't a one-time decision. It's a practice of reminding yourself, I am not here to win every argument. I am not here to carry unresolved guilt forever. I am not here to bleed energy into battles that were over years ago. You're here to live, to create, to rest, to grow, and none of that happens when your nervous system is trapped in someone else's unfinished business. So the next time someone tries to pull you back into a version of yourself you've outgrown, you don't need to fight them. You just need to stop offering your peace as a reaction and instead anchor into something quieter, something firmer, something that says, you can believe what you want, but I'm done living there. I've moved forward and I'm not coming back. That's not rebellion. That's freedom. Part 10. When you live by your values, you attract the right people. Here comes a moment in life when you realize you don't have to change the world to find your people. You just have to stop betraying who you are. You don't have to pretend to be easier, quieter, more agreeable, or more available than you actually feel. You don't have to lower your standards just to keep someone close. And you certainly don't have to perform softness in order to be loved. The truth is simple, but not always easy to live by. When you start honoring your values without apology, you start attracting people who don't need you to shrink. But here's the hard part. Before those people show up, something else happens first. The ones who benefited from your silence, your people-pleasing, your go-with-the-flow nature, they start to fade. Not because you asked them to leave, but because your new energy, your self-respect, no longer matches their expectations. Think about it. Maybe you used to say yes to everything just to avoid conflict. Maybe you laughed at jokes that hurt you. Maybe you kept relationships alive even when they drained your joy, just because it felt safer than being alone. But now something has shifted. You pause before you speak. You take time before you reply. You no longer rush to explain yourself just to be understood. You've replaced being liked with being respected. You've replaced being available with being intentional. And as you quietly tune your life to the frequency of your true values, the world around you responds. I remember a story from someone I worked with, Melissa. For years, she was the go-to friend, always kind, always available, always the peacekeeper. She'd cancel her own plans to be there for others and bite her tongue just to keep the mood light. But inside, she felt invisible, not truly seen. One day, she stopped pretending. She didn't make a big announcement. She just started honoring her own time, setting simple boundaries, and speaking more slowly, more clearly. Some old friends disappeared, but something unexpected happened too. A new friend entered her life. Someone quiet, grounded. Someone who didn't need her to be bubbly or performative. They just listened and respected her pace, her space, her truth. That's what alignment looks like. Not a crowd, not noise, but connection that doesn't need explaining. This is the paradox of authenticity. The more you become yourself, the fewer people you may keep, but the more meaningful those connections become. Stoic philosophers knew this well. Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, your growth won't always be understood by those who only knew the old version of you. But keep going, because the version of you who doesn't need to beg for love, who doesn't need to be the loudest in the room, who doesn't need to fix others to feel useful, that version of you is magnetic without trying to be. You don't need to shout your values, you live them. You don't need to chase connection. You become the kind of person who draws it in, quietly, steadily, without force. So if you've been wondering whether being true to yourself is too much, if you've been told you're too distant or too serious now, remember you're not too much. You're finally enough for the right people. And the right people, they find their way to you when your energy speaks what your voice no longer has to. Let your boundaries be your welcome mat. Let your discipline be your peace. Let your values be the filter that protects your time and your heart. And if you've made it this far, if this message resonates, this space is for you. Subscribe to join a quiet, grounded community that honors clarity, presence, and emotional maturity. And if you know someone who's walking the same path, share this message with them. Not everyone will understand your silence, but those who do will never ask you to break it. You don't have to fight your way out of toxic spaces. You don't need to argue, confront, or force people to change. Most of the time, the answer is much quieter than that. You simply become someone they no longer recognize. Not because you disappeared, but because the version of you that once tolerated dysfunction, once danced to their emotional rhythm, is no longer available. And the beauty of this shift, it doesn't require a loud announcement. It doesn't require slamming doors or writing long explanations. It requires a decision, a daily decision to return to your own lane, to focus inward, to strengthen the parts of you that used to need validation, applause, or permission just to feel safe being yourself. You don't have to destroy anyone. You just stop feeding what drains you. You stop offering your energy where it's never respected, and in doing so, you start to vibrate at a different frequency. The people who once knew exactly how to push your buttons will notice, but they won't be able to reach you anymore. Not because you've become distant, but because you've become clear. You're not cold, you're anchored. You're not passive, you're intentional. You're not afraid, you're simply no longer available for anything that disrupts your inner peace. And when you live that way, deliberately, calmly, consistently, the right people feel it. You start attracting those who value your stillness, who respect your boundaries without testing them, who recognize that real power isn't loud, impulsive, or dramatic. It's still, it's disciplined, it's quiet. You no longer have to explain yourself, because peace doesn't need a speech. It speaks through how you carry yourself, through what you no longer react to, through what you now protect without apology. If someone tries to draw you back into chaos, you don't argue, you don't defend, you simply remain still and let their storm pass without your participation. That's what real healing looks like. It's not loud, it's not vengeful, it's not something you post about or use to prove your worth. It's subtle, invisible at first, but eventually unmistakable. Because when you stop sending out signals of weakness, neediness, or unhealed pain, you start transmitting something entirely different: presence. And presence is powerful. It doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't have to prove a thing. It just is. So if you're in the middle of a shift right now, if you're quietly becoming someone new, someone who no longer accepts what they once did, someone who values stillness more than attention, keep going. You're not losing people. You're losing patterns. You're not being cold. You're becoming clear. You're not walking away from others. You're walking back to yourself. And if that feels lonely at times, remember this: peace often feels lonely at first, until you realize it was never meant to be shared with people who can't honor it. Let your silence do the work. Let your calm become your protection. Let your energy become the boundary no one can cross unless they meet you in stillness. If this message spoke to something deep within you, if it reminded you of your strength, your clarity, or your right to choose peace every single day, then stay close. This channel exists to guide people like you, people who value emotional depth, stillness, and inner transformation. Subscribe to join this journey. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this truth, share it with them. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet message to help someone reclaim their voice, by learning they don't always have to speak to be heard. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to stop offering yourself to what doesn't deserve you, and the rest will fall away.